We're here at the Lopez Union Cemetery on Lopez Island, Washington, and this is our second annual cemetery walk. We just ask people who have loved ones who are buried here at the cemetery to come and tell us stories about who their relatives or loved ones were and when and how they came to Lopez, or if they grew up here, and a chance for the community to learn more about the history of the island where they live.
We're very proud of the family, their old family here. Seth T. came across on the wagon train, but he was born at Fort Laramie. And they came across the Oregon Trail, and they ended up in Seattle, and they're looking for a place to live. And they found an ad in the Seattle Times saying that there was some property for sale on Lopez. And then they went and saw the farm. The farm was just what they wanted. It was already established orchard. The farmer had fallen and accidentally had a gun accident and died. So the wife was selling the farm. And he ended up being a logger, and they were always land rich, cash poor. So he finally went to Arlington to do some logging. And then that's where he met Lydia. Lydia Ritchie came up from San Francisco with her father to check on some logging business he had invested in. So they rode the train up from San Francisco. She stopped at Arlington, and outside the train was a gentleman picking up some hunting hounds. That would be Seth. Well, Seth was having a little trouble with these hunting hounds. They were pups. And he was using some pretty colorful logger language. And she was getting off the train, and he tipped his hat very apologetic. And she started laughing. It's the funniest thing she's ever seen. It was love at first sight. They found love that summer. She went back to San Francisco, packed her bags, came back and got married. At 31 years old, she's 5 years older than Seth. She lucked out. And they went on to have 7 children. They always loved to grow apples, which Romaine Ritchie still picks up the apples. You go to their house, you could smell the apples. They had the back room always full of apples. And they said, as long as you have apples, you're never hungry. And it's true. So we still all raise apples. And Lydia, she found that the island was a happy place. People were kind. And it's the best place she ever found.
Well, didn't they donate Agate Beach as well?
That's true. My mother sat down with Lydia, and that'd be the mother, and they discussed dividing parts of the land up. And Mom says, how about a park? We're very, very lucky we have that park there. Well, we're down here at Sarah Ritchie. Sarah Ann Ritchie, my mother is named after her. There was no headstone on this plot here. So my mother made one. It's her handwriting. It says Sarah Ritchie, Oregon Trail pioneer. And the kids were all here, and one little nephew, he was laying it down here, and it broke. He felt so bad, it snapped in two. My mother looked at him and she says, well, it looks like it's been there for years, doesn't it? And he was so pleased. Now they do have a nice headstone. And we don't know too much about Sarah Ann Ritchie. There wasn't so much talked about her. But she came out here. Of course, she had this, they settled in that orchard. And she went on to have the 5 kids. It wasn't an easy life, it was a tough life.
My father immigrated from Norway, and when he was 12 years old, he left home and went to North Sea. He loved the sea and loved adventure, so he came to the United States, and first place he came into was South Carolina, and he taught himself English by reading the newspapers, and decided he wanted to live in the States. He was 44 years old and he married Mom.
My mom was 15.
No,
Right?
yeah, she had just turned 15. I was born just before she was 16. Anyway, I have to tell you this funny story. I asked my Aunt Emmy, Mom's sister, I said, do you remember when Mom and Dad got married? And she says, do I? I remember it was my birthday and I didn't get my ice cream. And Grandpa went to town to get ice cream, and somebody told him my mom and dad had eloped. He got in back in the old car and came home, and he forgot the ice cream.
Oh my God. That is really
Yeah, they eloped down to Cody, Wyoming. Got married down there.
So why did they come to Lopez?
We came out to a convention in Seattle in 1943, and my dad had always heard about the coast. Well, he had been on the West Coast when he was sailing. He'd come up to San Francisco, and he came up to Coos Bay, Oregon, so he always loved the coast.
It reminded him of his homeland, is what he said.
Yeah. We were the first ones to come to Lopez.
Of the
That were
family?
strangers and not related. And it was hard to get in and be friends with, because it was kind of cliquey.
Yeah,
And,
close-knit community. Say it nicely, right?
Right. And you didn't dare say anything about anybody because they were all related.
What did they do when they got here to make a living?
They farmed.
But out of all of these, Diane and my brother Marvin and Eddie, who was buried here,
Yeah, he died in 1949.
they were all born in Montana. But my brother John and I were born on Lopez. We're just down the road, straight down the road.
Dad had a big potato garden that was probably 100 feet long.
Yeah, at least maybe even 200 feet long and 50 feet wide.
Yeah.
And all the neighbors came. He only wanted to keep the big ones, So he'd take a wash tub, and he'd fill the wash tub with those little tiny potatoes, And all the neighbors came. They were beginning, like Dick Lee's came about that time, and Rabel's came about that time, and a bunch of those. Those ladies would come up and sit around that tub and sort potatoes for themselves.
5 cents a pound.
Yeah.
Oh my
I still got
gosh.
the sign.
Oh, that is so great.
Yeah.
I love that.
And whenever we do come up here to this grave, we all think of this little guy here, the Sather kid.
He died the year before.
Yeah. And he fell into a cistern.
They didn't even know it was there.
So we knew all those people.
I'm here to talk about the notorious Uncle Phil's little brother, Jim. And Jim Haston, when he grew up on the south end of the island, was fascinated with planes. Planes would fly over the island maybe once every 6 months. And they would stop whatever they were doing, run out of the barn, run out of the house, and watch this plane fly overhead. And so when World War II came along, he enlisted right away to become part of what's now the Air Force. I think it was the Air Corps at that time, or whatever they called it. And he became part of the 8th Air Force. And he was based in England near Cambridge. So here's the P-47 Thunderbolt. That's one that he flew. And then the P-51 Mustang. He remained in the military in the Air Force for 23 more years. He retired from the military and then transferred over to the Department of Fisheries in the state. And then for another 20-some years. And then retired to Anacortes and bought a home in Skyline overlooking Lopez Island. His wife, who he met, I think, on the East Coast, she was referred to as Brooklyn Betty because his brother Phil had also married a Betty. And so she was always referred to as Brooklyn Betty. She had been in the Navy, so she has a flag today too. And she refused to live on Lopez. Too primitive. She had seen how Uncle Phil and Betty lived. Outhouse, maybe no running hot water. She didn't want any part of it. So they got as close as Anacortes, Skyline.
They were going to live with Phil and Betty.
No way.
No, that would have scared me away.
Yeah, no way. I just really feel that he is one of my Lopez war heroes. He was just a really amazing personality. His brother was amazing too, but in a totally different way. Yeah. So here's with this little flying leather helmet.
So young.
Yeah, 22. And then picture of him with his fiancée, Brooklyn Betty, who was in the Navy. So she's in the military too. A photo of Phil, Jim, and his brother Bud, who's buried right there. So the three brothers are all lined up in a row. So that's the story of my war hero, Jim Haston.
Thank you very much.
I was born on Blakely Island and came to Lopez when I was like 1 year old. My uncle Ray Spencer had a sawmill, and so my dad worked in the sawmill with my uncle, and then when they sold the sawmill and everybody moved to Lopez, and so we lived at Spencer Spit for our early childhood. Exceptional place to live. Ray Spencer and Kate and Ray Spencer lived down on the beach, and we lived just up the hill a couple hundred feet. My dad is John Post, and next to him over here is the Hugheses, who are good friends. Back in the 40s at the Port Stanley School, he had a hardware store. The school's consolidated, so the building was empty, so we had a hardware store there. He was self-taught. He would do like electric, and when I was a little kid, I'd see him. He had the book on how to do it in one hand, and doing the electric stuff in the other hand. We bought a boat back in the early 50s called the St. Anne, and he gill netted on Lopez. And back then, there was a whole group of guys from Lopez who'd go to Alaska. So he'd go to Alaska. And so when he was in Alaska, we all got the measles. And Dolores almost died from the measles. And, I had the measles, and all 7 kids had the measles. So when he got back from Alaska, our mom said, "Please never again can you go to Alaska." So he just fished locally. My dad was taken in by Kate and Ray Spencer, who owned Blakely and had the sawmill, because they were our aunt and uncle anyway, and Kate and Ray didn't have any kids, so they took in my dad and his sister Shirley. And so they raised them. Another sister of Kate Spencer, Aunt Hetty, raised us, and she was very strict. And she was an elderly German lady, and she cooked a lot of cabbage, Brussels sprouts. I don't eat Brussels sprouts today. Because no. But saying something good, she cooked cream puffs and fresh bread, and so she would take the bread out of the oven and slice it and put butter and brown sugar.
When we got off the bus from school,
Yeah.
there was always the fresh bread.
Yeah, and butter and brown sugar, and it was wonderful.
Yeah.
But
And she washed our clothes on a scrub board. My dad wanted to buy her a washing machine, and she wouldn't have it. So I can still remember her washing our clothes on the scrub board and then hanging them out on the line. And it was my job to go pick them back up off the line. And when it was freezing outside, the sheets would be hanging there, right? And they'd freeze because they're wet. They'd freeze. And so we'd go along and snap the corners of them just for fun. I can still remember doing that.
yeah, so at Spencer Spit, so we had the whole beach to ourselves.
Yeah, two kids.
It was wonderful.
2 kids on that whole beach.
And so from the vantage point of the house, Aunt Hetty could look out the window and see us on the beach because it was up the hill.
Yeah.
And so it was a great time.
9 people grew up in the house that I live in, and if you drive by my house, you'll think, wall to wall.
Yes, it was. My grandfather, Clifford, his dad, lived on Lopez for a period of time. And so he was a miner, and he told me there is no gold on Lopez Island. I'll just throw that in.
And
Yeah, if there was, he probably wouldn't have told us.
But if you go down, and I was just talking to Scott about this, if you go down to Otis Perkins Park, you can find rocks that have all this gold sparkly in them. And every time I find one, I think, oh, my great-grandfather would be so proud of me. But Scott said it isn't gold.
Yeah.
But it sure looks like it.
So he was a good dad. I don't think I ever heard him raise his voice to any of his kids.
And a kindling stick. And he never got you with it. He had you by the arm, and you're running around in a circle, and he's trying to get you with the kindling stick, right? Never worked out. So I don't know if it never worked out on purpose or it just didn't work out. But
I am Anna and John Matson's granddaughter.
And what's your name?
My name is Carol Trollness Marr, and my mother married my dad, Harold Trollness, and so she's buried right there. And she is Evelyn Matson Trollness, and she was born on Lopez, so she was born with all of the Matsons were born on Lopez. And he passed away in 1922 when my mother was 10. So my grandma raised my mother and her 2 sisters. I think there were 6 children total, and just 3 of them survived, the 3 girls. And she raised all 3 of them as a widow without any pension or anything else. Just they had chickens and cows and some family and residents, relatives and things that could help them out. So they ended up with my Aunt Elvie living on Orcas, and she happens to be Faith Vandeput's grandmother.
I was just going to ask you about that.
And Gene Vandeput is my cousin. He's also the grandchild of Anna and John. So I guess that kind of wraps up how we fit onto Lopez Island. So I've got my roots over here, and I've got my roots down at the Trollness site.
So you grew up on Lopez?
I did, yeah. My mother and my mom and dad were often on trying, well, it's a big deal, trying to make a living. And my dad pretty much always fished for his livelihood. And they moved back when I was about 2 and bought the property out near Iceberg Point. And in fact, they bought the house that Ed Norman was born in, which is another island tie.
Oh, yeah.
But, and then I went from school, started school when we were living there. And then when my mother passed away, I lived out at the Fitzsalmon Bay when my dad was the caretaker of all of that, and eventually ended up, when he bought the Trollness family place from his brothers and sister.
So that's the McKay Harbor Inn?
That's the McKay Harbor Inn.
But,
yeah.
So your father bought that from
Yeah, he bought it from his siblings, because my grandparents arrived there in 1912 and bought, there was 72 acres that was involved there. Richardson's store used to put out those calendars every year that was an aerial photo. And unfortunately, over the years, I'm not too sure who in my family ended up with them, but I don't have them, but they were wonderful.
Yeah. You said your mother died when you were how old?
I was 8.
You were 8?
Yeah, she died of breast cancer when I was 8.
Oh my gosh.
So she was 38. And I kind of, last year I had a hard time finding it because I'm looking around, and she was a reserved, quiet person, so I think that having the flowers there are just fine.
Would have suited her.
Yeah. My grandfather, Matson, he built the Hodemaker's house, which was a Weeks house. In fact, it was where Merrill would grow up. Now, my grandfather built that. He built the Ted Ritchie's place. I don't know who had it before, but the one across from your grandmother's place that's still standing, just barely. Okay, yeah. And then I built the one that Abe and Derek have now too, which they've done a beautiful job of rehabbing it and stuff. It's so that's really cool. But he didn't have a lot of time to do it, but he was a really accomplished carpenter.
Clearly.
Swedish.
Yeah, those are really beautiful houses.
I'm Colleen Weeks. My Lopez family is Weeks, Davis, Hutchinson, Blake, all of them.
Oh yeah, a lot of them.
A lot of them, Truxells, yeah. So they've all kind of intermingled, and but my direct line is Lincoln and Lenore. So Lincoln Weeks and Lenore Davis were my grandparents.
All right. And who was your father?
My father was Merrill, Lincoln's youngest son.
All right. And where did Merrill grow up?
He grew up here on the island. They had the ranch house on Davis Bay that the Hadamakers have now. My grandfather sold it to Iva Lee and her husband in 71, I think, 71 or 72.
So what do you remember your dad telling you about his childhood here?
Hard work, but a lot of laughs. Because of the size of their dairy farm, he would milk cows before he'd go to school. He'd get on the bus, go to class, come back, milk cows again. And if they weren't milking cows, they were slopping hogs. So it was just very farm-oriented. He said that also there were evenings and times that he would get together with his friends, and they'd go out and on the trucks and go rabbit hunting, and they'd be driving around with the lights on, and then all of a sudden they'd see the rabbits and they'd kill the lights, and everybody would just kind of scatter off the truck and off the running boards and trying to catch all these rabbits to take home to eat.
Oh my gosh.
Lincoln was the son of Oscar Weeks and Henrietta Blake.
Okay, that's where the Blakes come in.
Yes, that's where the Blakes come in.
All right. And Oscar was the son of Irene and Lyman.
Correct, yes.
Who were some of the first people to come to live. Well, her brother was
her brother was Hiram Hutchinson.
Okay, and so they came. When did they come?
They came around 1874.
Okay. What do you remember of Lincoln when he was older? What kind of person was he?
He was a man who would give you the shirt off his back. If you were in need, he would give you whatever he had. He was such a kind and gentle soul, but funny. He had such a sense of humor. The homestead house that Vortex is in now, Oscar built. He built that in 1899 or 1900, right about the time Grandpa was born.
Okay.
That was the house that Grandpa was born into, and so he lived there until he was about 14. And then in 1914, Irene, because it was all her property, she divided it at the road between her son Bertram and then Oscar. So Bertie got everything south of the road, and Oscar got everything north of the road.
Is that why they traded houses?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know that was why. A lot of Weeks and Davis family members on this island.
Yes. And then I found out today that Larry Cochran and I are cousins on the Troxel side.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to have grown up here and not be cousins with people.
Right.
Yeah. There's many thousands of years of indigenous history, followed by about 170 years now of settler history. And some of our earliest settlers came in the 1860s. The islands had just become officially part of the U.S. in the 1870s, and so more and more settlers were coming here, and homesteading and the fishing industry was just about to get started. So it was an interesting time to be living on the island.